right, well said. Here we go. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm excited to have today my good friend and fellow New Mexican American. I had the pleasure of having John Tegmeyer in my jazz band when he was an undergraduate, which was a pretty special thing. And he's now in Los Angeles for, oh my goodness, 20 years. Studio musician out there and living the life out there. He's our second time as our guest artist here at camp. So please welcome my good friend John Tegmeyer.
So I don't get nervous about going on doing big performances and stuff like that, but security blanket. Now I feel better. Okay. So I actually asked Russ. I'm like, these things. I'm always like, I don't really know what to talk about, but I know you're a lot of educators, so it's probably best to kind of open it up to you guys if you have any clarinet specific questions. I know a lot of you are just really excellent teachers, but if there's anything specific you'd like to know about, like some of my practice techniques, or anything like that, or anything about what I do, or what my favorite food is, or whatever. But yeah, anything in particular? Yep. Oh yeah. I have some plants.
Can you describe what you tell a beginning clarinetist from day one, embouchure-wise?
Yeah, so I usually tell beginners, like one advice is, don't do it. It's not going to end well for you. Actually, when it comes to, I was teaching beginner band for actually almost 15 years, up until not far long ago. And the biggest thing about the embouchure actually isn't so much the embouchure, it's the thumb pressure. Because a lot of you know that. So the more, and the embouchure will kind of follow. If you have the thumb pressure coming up, it kind of forces this, but you have to make sure they're actually keeping this still. And what I would do is I would actually turn this around, so I'm actually holding the clarinet, and then they're having the mouthpiece in their mouth, and they need to feel what that pressure is. And 9 times out of 10, like when I push them, they'll back off, and I say, no, don't, you have to push back. And that's the type of pressure. And that usually will help build up that strength. And then the other thing that helps build it up is being able to, without it rolling and falling around everywhere, and they'll complain that their thumb hurts or whatever, but they'll get used to it. And then thumb positioning on the thumb rest is really important too. I actually started with a really bad habit. I would actually get my thumb here. And if you don't know, the problem that comes with that, it makes it kind of more comfortable because you have a little bit more support here. But the problem is if you look on top where your finger placement are, your fingers are way over here. So you end up doing weird contortions, and it just causes all sorts of problems. So you can find, they don't have to be these necessarily. Pencil grips work fine. I don't know if people still use those. I would put 2 or 3 on them just to really get some padding. But right where the nail meets the skin on the side, that's the best place for it. And then you're lined up. You're good to go. And that always helps with the placement. And then of course, as many of you know, pads, not points. This is the tricky thing about clarinet is you have to be very accurate. There's no room for, I kind of half hold it, or I didn't quite seal it, you're going to hear that immediately, that it didn't work out, and that's why, like, when I first started learning saxophone, I was like, well, this is great, you can just put my fingers wherever. It's wonderful. My sound isn't very good, but, I always joke, I sound like a sixth grader with really great technique on the saxophone. Yeah.
Somebody in the chat asked, how do you feel about neck straps for beginners?
The old curmudgeon to me is like, back in my day, but I think it's actually a pretty good thing if you really need it. If you've really tried, and it's just not happening, then, that's fine if you have to do it. I think the trick is making sure you're not using it as like a crutch, or it's not taking away from other proper technique. Making sure that it's at the appropriate length. Saxophone players, it's like too loose, too tight. It's got to be exactly at the right to get that pressure, the embouchure we were talking about. So yeah, I think it's fine. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, you talked about it a little bit. Do you have any tips or tricks for hand position, especially with the right hand? I know you talked about the thumb, getting in the right spot.
Yeah,
so pedagogically.
Sure. Yeah, most of the time, just having this positioned here, and then making sure they're lined up. I used to have actually too much point, not excessively. I mean, I was still able to play pretty well. But then I got a few lessons when I was here with Eddie Daniels, who's a wonderful clarinetist. And one of the first things he corrected was really flattening out these pads, really making sure that your pad is the thing that's really sealing the hole. And then the other thing is getting your kids in front of mirrors, or phones now with the reverse camera, whatever. But making sure they're really watching and seeing that. I will do exercises that are very monotonous. They're super boring to listen to, but they're really excellent. Putting like a metronome on. So clarinet players, some of you definitely will know this exercise. But so that's 120 right there. But I will literally get in front of a mirror and just starting on your lowest note, or you can literally pick a note that. And then once you kind of have that under really good control, like really making sure you're hitting the same spot every single time, and then you can take it up to 16th notes or whatever. But I mean, I just happen to pick those two lowest notes. But especially if you have kids who are trying to learn how to get over the break, going from like A to B or B flat to B or something like that, and just making sure that your fingers are exactly in the right place, and getting that mirror and make sure they're hitting in the same spot every single time. And that usually will help sort a lot of that out. Yes?
Somebody in the chat said, should the thumb be lined up between certain keys in right hand? Example, movable thumb rests.
Oh, well, speaking about, so my particular clarinet, and a lot of clarinets I've seen usually have it, like the ability to put it down this far shouldn't happen. You should be as close to this as possible. So your thumb and index finger, like if I handed you a glass of water or a drink or something, that natural grip, it needs to be as close to that as possible. So a lot of times these adjustable thumb rests, I mean, it's nice and convenient, but it actually doesn't help, because when you're down here, well, now you have this, and now you're overcompensating. So your right hand you're going to lose control. You're going to lose faculty in your right hand. So yeah, keeping it, if it is adjustable, keeping it up as far as you can. I've even seen some teachers, the non-movable thumb rest, the one that are permanent, they'll actually take the screws out, turn it around, which you definitely need to have one of these because if you've seen the way they're shaped, that's very uncomfortable. But if you have a padding, it'll actually line this up better. So yeah. Yeah, I'm actually going to get a quick drink of water. I forgot that this place sucks the water out of every possible pore. It's so dry. So yeah, any other clarinet questions or yeah? Sorry, I saw you first. Go ahead.
Okay, when you are teaching students, baby beginners, to go over the break when it's time for that,
Yes.
what fingers would you ask them to leave down?
Oh, well, if they're just trying to learn just the idea of doing that, it's always best to start with as many down as possible. So my particular shading on this clarinet that I like to use is basically all down, including this B here, minus this middle finger down here. Now, if you're teaching beginners, I think they can kind of work out what shading is going to work for their particular clarinet, but having everything down, and then the only thing you have to do is you're sliding off of here and getting here. And so instead of having to worry about all of this, they're literally just worrying about these two fingers. And as you know, I mean, it takes some time, and but it kind of sets them up, I think, for more success. Yeah. Someone over here? Yeah. Yeah.
How do you approach explaining tongue position?
I actually never thought as much about tongue position until I started playing saxophone, and it's a much bigger deal in saxophone. Part of it is just because the saxophone shape, it's conical, and this is much more just kind of straight for the most part. But there is still, some tongue position that needs to kind of be taken into account. On the whole, I try to keep everything pretty relaxed. It's not until you really start getting maybe altissimo that you might raise the back a little bit. And even then, I try to just keep everything as fluid as possible. When I was at school here, a good friend of mine, she and I would, we'd talk, clarinet and shop and all that stuff, but she had this really great idea that I still use to this day in my own practice, which is when you have to go from like across the break, or if you have to go from like a lower note in the lower register up to a higher note, we tend to think about it in terms of a real distance that you're traveling, right? So if you in real life, if you have to jump across this ditch, you're mentally preparing, and you're just like, I hope I make it kind of thing. And we have that sort of way of thinking when we're going from a lower note to a higher note. But if you really think about it, you're like, you haven't traveled anywhere. There's none of that. But she would use this technique where instead of imagining, like for instance, saying, like going from let's see, like an open G to like an E. So now if you are over anticipating it, you might not come out right, but instead of thinking of the high E, she'd say, imagine instead of going from here to the high E, imagine you're going down to the low A. And then that usually will keep everything very still here, because a lot of kids, when I would start teaching them going over the break, everything would tighten up and it would be just, and then they would squeak or squawk or it wouldn't come out at all. But as soon as you say, imagine you're going down to the lower note, then they would just totally relax and the thing would just kind of pop out because they weren't so tensed up anymore. Yeah. So I kind of went off on tongue position, but yeah, just kind of keeping everything sort of pretty relaxed. I don't move it around too much. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have a magical phrase to help the baby clarinetist remember which fingers are for what?
I don't. I wish I had some magic. I'd use it for myself. In terms of, do you mean, are you talking about in like a specific piece of music or?
Just in general, when you're teaching like clarinet in general, like baby beginners.
I mean, not really. I mean, obviously at some point they're going to have to alternate and do all that kind of stuff. But I don't have any magic bullet for that. You know, wish I did. If you find one, let me know. Yeah.
I have a problem with one of my children that is always flat no matter what.
Oh man. You thought about changing him to flute or something? Always flat no matter what. Well, it could be, my first instinct would say they're probably not pushing up high enough. Just case in point, if I have a really sloppy embouchure and I start just playing an open G, I'm not putting any pressure. It's literally just, watch what happens as soon as I push up. Not only does it sound better, but the pitch rises up. So kids who are playing really under, they're probably not pushing up into these teeth enough. If that's still not working, it may be a reed issue. I know for me personally, if I'm playing on reeds that are just too soft, I can sit and pinch and have it pushed in all the way and do all the best technique. I'm not going to win that race. It's just not going to happen. So you might think about upping the size of the reed, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons, but that would be my diagnosis. Yeah.
What strength would you suggest beginners start on?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on where you live in the country. I know for me personally, I started out on a 2, I think, 2.5. That seems to be a good general size, but you know, I've been to places like Denver and up in the mountains, and all of a sudden a 2.5 turns into a piece of tree bark, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I don't know why that does that. But yeah, the elevation gain really hardens the reeds up. But yeah, I think 2.5 would be good. My daughter, she's actually a cellist. She's playing cello wonderfully. She's actually here at the camp. I promised I wouldn't embarrass her, so I won't say anything. But it's through kind of a scheduling thing at her school, she ended up having to learn how to play an instrument. And she came home and said, Dad, I'm going to be playing clarinet. I was like, oh no, I didn't want this for you. But she came home, and the teacher, who's doing a really wonderful job with very limited tools that he has, sent her home with like 3.5 size reeds. Just, I'm playing on a 3.5 now, you know, and it's feeling pretty hard here in West Texas. So she was kind of making it work, but I mean, you could just really hear it. So, you know, I was able to get her that. But yeah, starting your kids on the right reed strength, 2.5. Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
We're teaching F and E. It's like one of the first days we're learning notes on the clarinet. Talk about left thumb placement to set our kids up for success for later.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen this all the time. They love to just either rest it here or I can do this with one hand. I'm like, you know, you can drive a car with your feet. Doesn't mean you should. But, so yeah, if you're starting with it, just making sure that it's absolutely just floating there. And again, I know it's the one finger that's sort of behind the clarinet, but even if you can kind of angle yourself at a mirror so you can sort of see behind, and so the kid can actually see if they're actually planting it here or doing other weird stuff. And the same thing up here. You know, I'm sure you've seen kids stack fingers, just have them relax, which actually is another benefit to being able to do that. I had it described to me as if you had to play piano, you wouldn't go up to a piano, wrap your thumbs underneath, and try to lift up and then play, right? Nothing would happen. But if you can just make sure your thumb is doing all the heavy lifting, all your other fingers are free to just sort of relax and do what they need to on the keys. Yeah. Yes?
Should beginners rest their pinky fingers on the keys from the beginning?
That's a good question. I don't know, clarinet players, what do you think? I haven't thought about it that much. I don't think I do, but maybe I do. Yeah, it's probably a better idea to do that, because then if you need to move it, it's right there, and you avoid this terrible sound.
Do you have ideas for helping students break the habit of puffing their cheeks when playing? I occasionally have students come to me that have formed a habit of puffing their cheeks. Middle school.
Yeah, that's when
It was in parentheses.
I had teachers who would use fingers and pencils. I was always getting prodded, but if I started puffing my cheeks, they would, because kids are still like, there's spatial awareness, especially the little ones, is like, that's why you see them always tripping over stuff and destroying things without meaning to. They're still figuring out this awareness. So I think having a physical response. So if you see a kid who's like puffing their cheeks, sometimes just the eraser of a pencil just like, hey, and it's like, okay, and it might take a few times, it might take a while, but having that constant physical reminder, eventually bring it in. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone else with the question? Yes.
When you were playing the cadenzas,
Yes.
there was a portion where you were playing very short, very staccato notes, very, very quietly in the altissimo. The question is, what changes as you play softer, as the volume comes down?
Well, I'm not, might upset some people, I'm not using as much air. I know you always think, you have to use constant air. I think it's always a ratio. It's always a balance. It's a balance of your reed, your mouthpiece, your embouchure, and your airspeed. And that's really what's going to give you your louds and your softs. But if I'm playing like really, really soft, I'm just using the right amount of air to get it that speed, or to get it that volume. I've heard teachers say you always need to be just blowing constantly the whole time. And you do need to be blowing, but I mean, it's not a lot. It's not a lot. If you want a nice big full sound, yeah, go ahead. But if you're trying to play, really. I mean, I'm barely letting enough air in through to vibrate the reed. That's it. Yes. Anything else? Yep.
If you have the option in like a beginning band of placing a student on bass clarinet, would you do that just based on size, or could you have too many regular clarinets?
Well, size would be definitely important. I mean, if you got a little one, they just can't do it. It's not gonna, it's not gonna help them. It's not gonna help you. But I think if you can start everyone out on B flat for a little bit, it's much easier. Saxophone players, you'll back me up on this. It is so much easier to switch from clarinet to a larger reeded instrument like saxophone or bass clarinet than it is to go the other way. I can't tell you how many saxophone players, amazing, brilliant saxophone players, they hate the clarinet. They hate it so much because it's harder here. So if you can start your kids on B flat where they're like get pretty solid and they kind of like they understand the mechanics, they can always come back to that because they remember what that feels like. But I also know you can't have a band with like 85 clarinets. I don't know why, but yeah, that doesn't help when you're trying to perform certain literature and stuff. But I definitely think it's good if you can get a kid to get really solid just on kind of one thing and then kind of switch them, But also, it depends on the kid and your situation too. So that's my opinion. Yeah.
I would guess that most of us fail at teaching shading at all.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So what would be, especially for a non-clarinetist, a good way to help them at least do something?
Yeah, I've actually heard people. My old teacher, I saw him back in New Mexico, and I was playing with him. He's like, "Oh, you're still doing the shading?" I'm like, I thought that was just a thing. He's like, "No one's really teaching, at least where he was. No one's really teaching that anymore." So if you're not familiar, it's basically you have about 4 notes on the clarinet, your throat tones, that they really need some help. If you don't, and shading, you're just adding certain finger combinations to help sort of richen, get the sound richer. So if I play an open G without any shading, it's all right, but Now it seems like a small difference, but it really adds to the whole. It adds just to the overall tone texture of those notes. My A's particularly, like by itself, is really bad. It's very thin. It's very nasally, reedy. And there it is, right? And the other issue, there's my standard shading fingerings are, if you're playing G, just these two down here. If you're doing G sharp or A flat, same fingering. If you want to get fancy, you can do one of these. A, 2 and 3 on both hands, and the same for B flat. Okay? Now, as they get more comfortable with those shadings, then you can sort of kind of fine-tune it to their particular clarinet, because as you know, every clarinet is not built the same, so if you're playing on a different one, you're going to have to change your shadings. But you need to do it, and you need to start it early, because by the time they're, even 7th, 8th grade, they've gotten used to doing it this way, and unlearning or having to relearn those notes, it's a real pain. It also allows better control at different volumes, because if you don't have the right shading down, and you're really trying to get some volume out of it, I can tell you it's going to squawk. But you have much less chance of doing that if you have some shadings down. You'll be able to get more volume.
Along those lines, when you check your instrument length for pitch, do you do it on open G at the barrel, or do you do it on shaded G or do you do something else?
I always shade, no matter what. Because whatever I'm going to be using this clarinet for, I know that's what I'm going to be doing every time. I would say the only time you can forego shading is if you're ripping runs everywhere like crazy, then it's fine, because no one's going to pick out, that 1/16th note was slightly, it's fine. But on these long tones, you gotta shade those throat tones. You just have to. You can always tell the difference. It's a huge difference, especially when you get the whole section doing it together. It's much nicer. Yeah.
And do you adjust your instrument anywhere else when you set the instrument length?
Yeah. So
to what notes?
No. I mean, you're talking about like if I'm trying to tune it.
Right.
Yeah. So if I am sharp, which this particular clarinet is sharp, I will usually start pulling out here actually, and then if it's really not doing it, then I'll do it here. I know it seems reversed. A lot of people, they do the barrel first and then down here. And again, it just sort of depends on your clarinetist and your clarinet, how you do it. But these are the two main ones. If you get really desperate, you can kind of pull out in more places, but at that point you might want to look at what's up with the clarinet.
What note are you checking when you adjust the middle?
I mean, at this point, really any note I may be questioning, but usually throat tones, usually open G, maybe an A or a concert A, or if I'm working on a slower piece and I, just all over the place. But before you do that, always make sure that you're doing everything else right. Like if this is solid, you're like, okay, my checklist, I've done everything right, and I'm still out of tune, then just. Any other questions about clarinet, or yeah?
As a professional artist for recording clarinetist,
Yeah.
What's your warm-up like? Just so I can tell my kids.
Oh, sure, yeah. So I still use a lot of similar stuff I learned in college. I learned some stuff I learned even in middle school. So that stuff is super relevant. If I'm really going in on a practice session, always start with long tones. It's always the best thing you can do. Don't start rushing in with everything. But the register studies. I'll also always have a metronome going on, and you're not only practicing your tone, but you're actually practicing your breathing control too. Especially if you put it on and you challenge yourself. The slower you put your metronome, the more challenging it is. But eventually you build up a lot more lung capacity. So I'll start out with that, and then the exercise I was showing you earlier. And I'll do that all the way up till I get to B flat, going over the break. Just to kind of, I think when we try to play fast, we're trying to play all the notes. And if you only have 2 notes to worry about, it just takes a lot of, confusion, or I don't know, for me anyway. It's like I only have to focus on these 2 notes, getting them as clean as possible. After that, I have a few method books that I'll go through, arpeggios, chromatic scale, different etudes I like to play through. And then after that, it's, then it's my free time, and I get to, I love to improvise, obviously, and take time with that. And even that takes a lot of discipline, too. It may kind of come across as like, just kind of playing anything, but it's like, there's a lot of things I have to do. It's actually a really good thing if you're trying to get your kids to, like if you're playing a piece that has more jazz influence in it, have the metronome at the tempo that you want, but instead of it being 1 and 3, make it 2 and 4. And you can practice scales that way. Get my metronome, I'm sure what I'm talking about. So if I'm playing just a, so it's right on the beat, okay? But all of a sudden now this is on the offbeat. And then, just using these metronomes in different ways, because it forces me to have to think about what I'm playing, because I think the goal is we play something so much that we don't have to think about it, and that's good. But sometimes when we do it for long enough, we start making mistakes because we start getting a little lazier. Like, I know it. But if you can adjust where you're feeling the beat, it forces you to rethink about things in just a different way. Or even changing like your scale to like triplets. I'll do this sometimes where like I'm trying to get like a 16th note pattern is 4 and 4 and 4 16ths, So I'll put the triplet, and all of a sudden you're kind of feeling this pulse in a different place. Like even the solfeggiato. All of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, it's not on the beat anymore. So that's a really useful thing for kind of cleaning up your playing, getting everything much more even, because now you're not necessarily thinking about what your goal note changes. I think when we have groups of 4, it's like 4, 4, 4. And this just changes so you're thinking about all the notes together. Anyway, but that's what I do. But yeah, that's just part of what I do. Yeah.
Do you move the airstream inside your mouth up and down when playing in different registers?
Not really. I mean, like I said before when I was talking about tongue position and throat, I try to keep everything pretty relaxed. Let's see if this real do it, but if you're playing like a low note to like a high note, I'm not really changing too much here. And that's sort of like I was talking about earlier, like trying to visualize a physical distance between these notes. Sometimes it's helpful, but I think it actually, when you take out that element, now I'm not like anticipating like, oh, it's a really big jump, I hope I can get it. It's like, well, no, you're not. You're just doing this. That's all you're doing. And then whatever movement happens here is very negligible for me. Yeah.
So, since you play professionally and recordings and all those kinds of things, you get hired to do that stuff. What have you found being that level of professional musician that is a skill that you rely upon in order to be able to be hired Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And or be in that level of musicianship?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Along the way, as you can kind of look back at when you were learning and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Was there a skill in particular, or was there a
Several
sequence
skills.
of events? You know?
Several skills.
Yeah.
I should also mention, there's also a lot of, for lack of a better word, kind of luck when it comes to the business end of things. Because I can tell you there's an insane number of very talented musicians who no one in here knows about, but they are, and I'm sure many of you know some too. It's like they may not be, household names, but wow. But in terms of skills that I rely on, it's the ability to be very flexible with whatever's happening in a certain situation. You cannot be rigid. And I'm not even just talking about like, oh, jazz, you can improvise or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Like, they may come in, with, they may say, okay, well, we actually don't want to do it in this key. We're going to do it up a half step. And you got to be able to, like, okay. Because you certainly can't be like, actually, no, I can't do that. And be like, oh, cool, well, we're never calling you again. And there's a lot of fake it till you make it. So I've had many sessions where like, yeah, we need someone, and I'm like, what comes out of my mouth is like, yeah, okay, no problem. And in my head, it's like, oh my God. It's just a lot of pressure. But it's everyone else around you is also at this really high level too, and you don't want to disappoint anybody. And that's not just like where I'm playing. I think that happens in your bands as well. It's like no one sets out like, oh, I want to, whatever. But you're building up their confidence in that. Being able to sight read is absolutely key. It's very rare that I will ever get any music ahead of time. I just have to roll in, and what's on the stand is what's on the stand. And they're not going to give you time to like, oh, hold on, they're like, red light's on, we got to do it. It's money. So they have to do that. So, all the sight reading exercises you guys can do is really, really important. Being able to transpose, sight reading transpose. Now I know some of you, your little ones, obviously don't worry about that. But especially as a clarinet player, because we're in B flat, being able to transpose to C. I get so many charts and music and stuff that's in C, and you just have to do it. So I've actually gotten to a point where depending on the type of music, the font, I will accidentally read it up a step because I'm like, oh, I think it's jazz. Okay, up a step, and they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm transposing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm doing this. But yeah, so these are learnable, tangible skills. Not just like, well, hope for the best. It's like be able to sight read, be able to transpose, and just be down. Be a good hang. Like don't show up. Just like you can't be like, yeah, I'm awesome, and you guys whatever. It's like show up and be professional. Be ready to go, and just be a good hang. So yeah, my mouth is drying out again. I'm gonna pour water. All right. Anything else about yeah?
Just going back to shading.
Yes.
There's all sorts of different finger combinations.
For sure.
You can do just an infinite number almost. From a beginner standpoint, would it be beneficial when teaching A to teach them to put those fingers down so that when they cross the break, it's so much easier?
Yes, absolutely. I think, like I was telling you, my standard fingering for beginners for that A, 2 and 3 and 2 and 3. And that's already, you're already ahead of the game. Because if you happen to go from A to B, going from A to B, that's ridiculous. That's who designed that? Why would you do that? But if you have this is already giving you a leg up. And then once they get a little bit more advanced, more comfortable with that, then you can add your B key. By the way, I'm aware that I play this B, E key with my middle knuckle. I've done it since 6th grade. It's worked fine. I need you all to calm down. If you have a kid who does it, if they're making it work, Just let them do it. So anyway, I can bend it. I just don't want to. But anyway, but yeah, when you're shading on your A or B flat, after a while, then you can do that. And the same thing if you're going from like an A to C, then you change the shading fingering, so you put down that one. Or A to C sharp, put down your C sharp key. Or A to E flat. It works with all. Okay. Yeah. So, yep.
What is your setup currently that you're using?
Currently, I play on a Buffet vintage clarinet. I have a BD5 Van Doren mouthpiece and a a Van Doren saxophone ligature, and which, if you look very closely, you can see that is definitely not fit correctly. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then Van Doren reeds. I do. My personal favorite is the Rulapec, the 56, because I'm fancy. No, this is just the one that I feel gives me the best sound. And but when I went into the Van Doren studio, my friend who works there was saying a lot of the USC kids were coming in, and the teacher there was giving them this setup, and he said, yeah, they sound really good on it. And I said, okay, well, let's try it. And we went through probably every possible combination of ligature and mouthpiece, and for whatever reason, this one always sounded the best. So yeah, this is the one I've been playing on for a while. But I'm not a salesperson. I like my setup, but you gotta find what's gonna work best for you and for your kids too. I wish they still made vintage. They don't make them. It's got too many keys now. I'm like, I don't know. I could relearn how to play the whole clarinet. Like all these extra side keys and low F vent. I'm like, I'm not doing it. So, but yeah, that's my setup. And I also have an A clarinet. That's a green line A. It actually sounds great, and it won't crack because it's made out of particle board essentially. And it serves me well. It's very consistent, and so I like it. I don't have to play it very often, but occasionally, if you're in orchestra, they call for A. So yeah, that's my setup.
Just might be feel free to say no. On Freebirds, when you played with the CBD&A,
Oh yeah.
the crazy full range instrument bend.
Oh yeah.
How?
I haven't done that in so long. Since then. So if you're not familiar with what he's talking about, so Scott McAllister, right?
Yeah.
So he wrote a series of pieces for clarinet, sort of loosely inspired by like these rock songs. And so obviously one was called Freebirds, written for 2 clarinets, so I got to play with Doug Story. And yeah, and there's these glisses that start from low E all the way to the highest C. Which I don't know if he just does it, if he had it in for whoever he wrote it in for, but I don't like this guy, I'm gonna write it. But when I first started learning how to bend notes, I always, high C is the easiest one. You can kind of get it down to about a G without having to move anything. But after that, then it turns into kind of dragging fingers off. Yeah, you can kind of bend up to that high C that way, but it's just this very controlled kind of sliding fingers off. As a gag, I don't know if I'll do it. I don't know if it'll work here, but I would do the Rhapsody in Blue, but instead of stopping at the high C, you just keep on going. And then I did that, and I showed that to a friend. And there's like a little YouTube video where someone with a computer, and it just bends nonstop for like a minute, and just everything gets really weird. It's very, very funny. But yeah, the bending notes. Actually, ironically, your kids who have like bad embouchure and puff their cheeks, they'll probably be able to figure that out. So the trick is I usually use a combination of the throat. It's just never been great at teaching that one. I've always said there's some kids who get it, and some kids they just don't. But yeah, there's a lot of cool extended techniques you can do. But you get bored of playing it normal. Yeah. 5 minutes. Huh?
You got 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I got 5 minutes. Any? Yeah.
Odd question. For effect, do you ever alter the amount of mouthpiece in your mouth?
No.
Okay.
No.
Or the placement, like, I hear some people, clarinet players, play double lip, or they barely have any top teeth pressure.
Oh.
What's your view on all that?
Well, I think, I mean, I know there's some classical folks who use the double lip. And they sound great on it. I've tried a little bit of it. Personally, for me, it's if you do double lip, you have to sit down while you do it, because there's nothing to keep it still. So you literally have to hold the bell between your knees. So doing it standing up doesn't really work. But I've heard people, they sound amazing, because I think the idea is, if you're doing double lip, it sort of forces your mouth open a little bit more. And I think the thought is, like, if it's more open, the tone is going to be more open. I know when I was here, Doug Story would actually just give you more teeth pads or tooth pads. And so, you know, the more it just kind of forces you open. But I've also seen you can kind of sort of do that if you do like a little bit more mouthpiece in. Because, I mean, the idea, you're just trying to keep everything nice and open and relaxed. Yeah.
Last question.
Oh, yeah.
Do you use double tonguing a lot? Because I know that now, as we're getting into the 21st century and we're
Sure.
going to clarinet playing, double tonguing is a big thing.
Yeah. Articulation's probably, in my personal opinion, is probably my weakest part of my playing. And I think I have worked on double tonguing a little bit. I've been able to sort of get it to kind of work in my lower register. I know for me, it has to be the right reed. If you're playing on a reed that's too hard, just forget about it. It's got to be like a really good reed for it to really work. But when I do practice it, like if I'm doing 16th notes, you know, basically practicing just doing the ta part. So if you're doing like, was he open on that Paganini thing? So instead of tonguing every one with a single tongue, you're tonguing every two. So ta, 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 ta. And then you add your. And then as soon as I get in the upper register, then I have real issues with like my tone and my stuff. So I'm still working on that one, but I've kind of got it in the lower register. I just gotta spend more time working on it. For what I do personally, I don't get called on to do that much. It's mostly something I work on just because it's kind of fun to just kind of mess around with it. But yeah, but I think, you know, anytime you can, if you get kids who get beyond the normal stuff, you know, having a way they can learn extended techniques, you know, it's just fun at that point. Yeah.
Getting back to like standard beginner pedagogy,
Yep.
textbook, inhalation, embouchure. What do you leave the bottom lip on the reed and only open the corners? What do you do?
Yeah, that's what I do. If you can swing it, if you don't have a stuffed nose or anything, go through the nose. Yeah, especially for the beginners, so they don't have to reset and reset and reset, you know. But, you know, if you get a kid who's sick or whatever, then obviously it's not going to work. But yeah, keeping that bottom lip and the teeth still, and then you're good to go. Yeah. Yep.
For what reason would you add more teeth pads?
Just to kind of force your mouth open a little bit more. So if your mouth is open, you're basically opening up this, you know, this cavity in your mouth. It's like more resonant, you know, I think is the idea behind it. And then it's just more open, so you have a more open sound. I mean, as I understand it. So people who have more experience probably can tell it, yeah.
Before we go, who do you listen to on clarinet that inspires you now?
So I still, you know, still love listening to Eddie Daniels. It's just really wonderful. But as far as classical players, like really dying, like Ricardo Morales is what a beast. Just really amazing. He's probably one of the first clarinet players I ever heard on the radio where I had to pull over because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was just so good. But in terms of my own stuff, I don't listen. There's not too many clarinet players doing jazz in this particular way, but I love listening to people like Joshua Redman is just like I've been in love with his music since I was 16, and he's still fantastic. He's a tenor player, by the way, if you don't know, and he's won all sorts of awards and tours around the world. But he's something else, you know. And there's, I mean, a million. You know, I'm happy afterwards. You're welcome to come up and pick my brain about more stuff too. I'm happy to talk to anybody. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. Yeah,